welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Heather Watley and I am an Educator Solutions Consultant here at Edmentum. I'm based in St. Paul, Minnesota, so just a little bit north of everyone, and I've been working with schools in Iowa for the last 5 years and helping them to implement digital curriculum, assessments, and classroom tools for personalized learning. And today we're going to be using this Zoom tool. Obviously, you are muted when you joined. Feel free to stay muted during the conversation. And if you do have some questions or want to dig into something a little bit more, feel free to enter that in the chat and we will capture everything that is in the chat that you share with us today. We are recording, and for anyone who has registered or it has joined today, you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording so you can watch it another time or share it with your colleagues as well. If we don't get to all your questions in chat by the end of today's session, we will be following up with a response and we'll capture those questions and do our best to answer those for you and get that out by email following the event as well. So really, why are we here? We're here for so many reasons. Life has changed so much in the last few months. And when schools first closed, all of you were tasked with coming up with a continuous learning plan and making that tough decision about are we going to offer a voluntary educational programming, or are we going to make that work required? And those are tough decisions, dealing with who has access to technology and internet in their homes and all the equity issues that go along with switching all of a sudden to a distance learning environment. And now that the school year has wrapped up, hopefully you've had at least 1 minute to take a deep breath and maybe reflect a little bit on what you experienced over the last few months. And now is a time when all Iowa schools have to put together that return to learn plan by July 1st. And it's an opportunity for us to be proactive rather than reactive as we had to be. And so I thought this was a great time to bring some Iowa educators together and have this conversation and really just kind of think out loud while we're all in the midst of this planning process. So with that, our agenda today, we will do some introductions so that you can meet our facilitator and our panelists. And then we will jump into the panel discussion, and hopefully if we do have some time at the end, we'll do some Q&A. But like I said, if you've got some questions that you want to enter into chat, please do that, and we'll do our very best to get those answered for you. All right, so today we've got a facilitator and two wonderful panelists for you, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Cassie Rokoltz. I am a colleague of Heather. I am your facilitator today. I was actually born and raised in the great state of Iowa. Originally, hometown is Garner, Iowa, for those from north central Iowa. Hello. I migrated my permanent status down to Solon, Iowa, where I reside now with my family, and I currently am the Director of Product Management at Edmentum over our Exact Path and Study Island products. But today I'm your facilitator, and we'll turn it over to both Jen and Wes to introduce themselves.
I guess I'll go. I'm Wes Golden. I'm the Director of Learning and Collaboration for the Clinton Community School District in Clinton, Iowa, about as far east as you possibly can go. Very happy to be here today and help folks out, or at least kind of share our story. I've been in this position for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I was a high school science teacher, but passion for teaching, passion for learning, and ready to jump on board this this journey we got going with Return to Learn. So.
Good afternoon. I'm Jen Sigrist. I'm the Executive Director of Media and Innovation for Central Rivers AEA. This is my first school year with the AEA. I was at Van Meter with Van Meter Schools for the previous 10 years as not only the elementary principal for a while, but the Director of Personalized Learning and Innovation there. So I've been all over this, feel like I've been all over the K-12 system, from being a high school teacher to a first grade long-term sub, a fifth grade teacher, seventh grade science, Title I at the high school. I mean, I've just kind of done it all. So I look forward to working and talking with you today.
Great. All right, well, let's jump into our first question.
All right, so as Heather mentioned earlier today, we are definitely turning our heads now that the school has closed. We're turning our heads towards the fall and understanding what that might look like and what we can do from a proactive approach. So the first question that we want to ask our panelists today is, what should district leaders consider when it comes to restructuring effective teams in developing a thorough and thoughtful return to learn plan? So we'll go ahead and start with you, Wes, and can you give us some insights about what your district is doing and some suggestions as we work through our plans in this proactive approach?
Yeah, so first what I want to make sure I preface this with is what we're doing in Clinton is a way. It's not the way, and nor do we claim to believe that how we're doing what we're doing is perfect. I continuously share with our team, you know, we're going to give this our best shot and know that it probably is going to be a work in progress and that we're going to learn along the way together. We might make some mistakes, but through those mistakes, we're going to learn a whole lot. In response to the question, you know, what we considered when we structured our teams to develop this return to learn plan was that, frankly, we started with the state guidance. And what the state said is, hey, here's some areas to consider. And in those areas, they considered 7 different categories to include leadership, infrastructure, health and safety, the Iowa academic standards, the social emotional behavioral health, equity, and data. Now, for me, as the task was handed to me by my superintendent, he said, hey, Wes, take care of this. What I realized is that there's no way on this planet that we can try to take that and eat that elephant all in one bite. So what we did is I decided what we worked through is we have a leadership team, and through that team, we've broken down into subcommittees. And the subcommittees include leadership and data. We then combined infrastructure, health and safety as one subcommittee. We took the Iowa academic standards and left that as one subcommittee. We didn't combine it with anything else. And then we took social emotional behavioral health and equity and placed that into a subcommittee as well. Now, the composition of our leadership team and data, that subcommittee, is the superintendent, myself, our student services director, and our CFO, our business official. Through infrastructure and health and safety, our superintendent is really kind of leading that subcommittee. We also have in that subcommittee our IT director, our transportation director, our building and grounds director. We have our community health, our county health representative through the Iowa Department of Public Health. We have our head nurse. We have 7 nurses in our district. And then our CFO is on that committee, and we also have a principal on that committee, one of our elementary school principals. So they're taking that infrastructure piece, that health and safety piece, and they're really breaking it down into the key components based on whatever the Iowa Department of Education has shared with us. The Iowa academic standards, because my primary job and role in our district is the curriculum and instruction piece. We have a principal from each building level, elementary, middle, and high school. And then we have 3 teachers, one from each level. 2 of them are instructional coaches. One is an ELA coach, and one is a math coach. And then we have a middle school teacher who is very engaged. Our social, emotional, behavioral health, and equity team is headed by our director of student services. We have a school counselor on that team. We also have a member of our local AEA, the Mississippi Bend AEA, on that team. We have 2 principals. We have a board member, school board member on that team. And then we also have a local social, emotional, behavioral health representative from a local service organization on that committee as well. So we have a timeline. We have a large group meeting Then we have several based on the team leaders or the subcommittee leaders. We've broken out into our subcommittees to really kind of nug through the eaches. And then we're going to come back next week and have a large group meeting again, kind of presenting what are the things we're really going to commit to on our return to learn plan. We're not necessarily looking at, shall I say, the eaches per se. We're just looking at what are we going to commit to in each of those categories or each of those subcommittees. We'll work out the eaches kind of following that, and that's really where we're at right now. So we're in the middle of this, just like many of you are, but in general, that's kind of the 30,000-foot view. So hopefully that answers that question. I'll pass it off to Jen.
Thanks, Wes. I think those are a lot of great things to consider. So I would maybe only add, consider a communication loop that gives your team feedback. So kind of that, think about it as a continual cycle and how you might not only here in the beginning, but throughout the course of the year, think about feedback loops. I might also ask you to consider, in your including parents in your groups, think of it not only as the parent lens, but you've probably got parents in your community that have similar situations facing them in their line of work. Whether you have healthcare professionals, you have people responsible for businesses who are creating their own kind of work safety protocols. But just think about the people that you have in your community that you can lean on, and know that while sometimes in schools it's a little frightening for us to reach out to the community, you open it too wide and you think, oh gosh, what am I going to get? We're all kind of in this together, and bringing them in and throughout the return to learn process might be something to consider. It might be helpful for you to have them engaged in the work. You could even do that through like your current SIAC structure, excuse me.
Yep.
Then I think the final thing I would add to your ideas here for this leadership team consideration would be, well, I forgot 2 ideas. Include students. Even as young as 4th grade, we've had students give us feedback. I know my own son, who's a 4th grader, was asked by his principal, what's working for you? She did a Zoom with him, and he felt so special. And one of his friends was on the Zoom as well. He felt so special to be able to talk to his principal about his thoughts, and in a follow-up that she gave me afterwards, which I thought was kind, she really appreciated his ideas. And she's like, he wasn't alone. He found this helpful, and most kids, picked up on that too, or he was confused by this part, and, that's something we can fix. So I just appreciated that. Then I was going to say, finally, consider some of your programs. I'll tell you the one I forgot was preschool. What considerations happen for preschool programs that may be different than the rest of your K-12 setting? The medical concerns of students who are on 504s. You're probably thinking about your special education programs and including them in whether they're teachers, parents, or students themselves in the whole return to learn process. But then I'd also think about ELs. What do we need to consider for those students and families? So yeah, just being mindful of that communication loop, bringing parents in, not only from their parent perspective, but their professional perspectives, including students, and then thinking about the range of programs that you'll want to make sure have a voice in your return to learn plans.
So if I could jump back in. So Jen, thanks for all those points. And what I think I want to support exactly what you said. And in that, I know one of our greatest challenges will be, and will continue to be, is a strategic communication plan. And I know that's one that we're really going to have to spend a lot of brain power working on. Who needs to be communicated with, because it's not just parents and students and teachers, but our community members, our service providers, and so on and so forth. I agree. We had a SIAC meeting in May. where we kind of proposed a lot of these things and got that feedback. So I appreciate your feedback loop. I want to jump on that because I think you're spot on, Jen, with that. And that, we've set out several surveys for students and parents and community members to give us some feedback already. We are, I'll say, one of the fortunate or unfortunate school districts. I'm going to say fortunate. We actually were one of the 6 districts in the state that decided to go required K-12. So that put us, I would think, in a position to gather quite a bit of data with that stuff. So thank you, Jen, for saying that. I just want to reemphasize those things you said. So thank you for saying that.
So it sounds like you both have a wide variety and run from logistics to communications to strategy to you name it. You have to touch every facet that belongs into the community aspects of school and the community belongings, parents, students, and really a very comprehensive set of steering committee that would drive back to a ready to learn plan that would be very thoughtful and strategic. So that was great advice. Thank you for your comments in relationship to that. So now that those plans are in place and you're kind of norming and forming what they might look like, what suggestions do you have in regarding to fall now that we don't have the Iowa assessments did not occur this past spring? From an assessment perspective, where do we begin? Where do we even start? There are lots of districts are struggling about how do we comprehend all of this, and there's unfinished learning that has happened, and delivering that just-in-time instruction and what that might look like from a scope and sequence to how I formulate my classroom coming back into the fall. So do you have any guidance? Perhaps, Jen, did you want to start us off with responding to that large question there?
Yeah. Well, first, I would probably say in any of these questions, I would go in with the mindset of we're not going to be perfect in August, and we're not going to fix everything by September, and it's an ongoing process. Whatever it is we're talking about, it's a learning process for us as much as it is students. So give ourselves some grace as you think about starting the school year. Then I would also say, when you think about just-in-time instruction, one of the fears that I worry about for teachers is I have to get everything they didn't get last year crammed into the first month of school so that I can get to my stuff. And I think that could be a realistic fear that could be, running around in our minds, not only as teachers, but even as parents. Like, okay, my kid's got to get it all in the first month and figure it all out. And so one of the supports we're trying to provide schools in our region, but even across the state through the AEA system, is not trying to do it all in the beginning. And instead, you might have some assessment tools that will give you some screener information, and that's great. I wouldn't feel like you have to spend the first 2 weeks of school to assess every content, everything, all throughout last year that they might have not learned, that unfinished learning. I would move away from that. Instead, focus on, what are our priorities for the year? And as each priority comes up throughout the year, how do we assess the unfinished learning just in time? So instead of assessing it all in August, assess it as it comes up, relation to the grade level standard they need to be learning now. So I'm going to use my 4th grader again. As he enters into 5th grade, instead of spending the month of August and July trying to finish up 4th grade for him, say, okay, here's the screeners, here's what we know about him, here are all the other things that we have, even if Iowa assessments isn't one of them. Here's how he might have participated in his learning in March, April, and May. But as we look at this first essential learning idea, what do we need to know about his unfinished learning as it relates to just this piece? And then move into a cycle throughout the year that when we come to another unit with another big idea, we're saying, what's Drake's unfinished learning here? Yeah, this is a graphic we created to try to help schools think about, don't try to solve it all in August. This is a process throughout the year. Try to figure out what your big priorities are. And Wes and I had talked about this a little as we prepared for today. Priority standards, promise standards, essential concepts, whatever you want to call it. Think about that for the year, but then unit by unit throughout your year, give yourself that permission to then identify through those pre-assessments the unfinished learning students need in order to maintain that grade level standard. So Drake's going to learn 5th grade standards. The research is really clear. If we try to meet him where he is now, we'll never get him to where he needs to be. We have to start with where we want him to be and back map the unfinished learning, build in those scaffolds as it relates to the 5th grade content in that example. So I would just continue to remind schools and teachers, don't feel the pressure. Don't get caught up into that. We have to have it all figured out in August and September, so then we can start the new grade level come October. You're in the new grade level. Identify that priority standard, and then what unfinished learning did they have from previous time, from the previous year that we need to scaffold so that 5th grade can still be successful, for my son, but whatever grade level you're talking about, that applies to that 7th grader, that high schooler, as well as that kindergartner. Yeah, Wes, talk about your work and your thoughts around that.
Certainly. So, the theme I hear as well, as kind of Jen brought that out, is that the level of anxiety. I think, teachers and educators look at what they do as personal, and they feel the pressure of having to close that gap as rapidly as they possibly can. I'm going to, my focus is on 2 things here, reduce the anxiety. And I'm gonna go down 2 paths here, but really one strong one, but it's, why reinvent the wheel? We already have the tools in our toolkit to take care of what we need to take care of. We're not really going to necessarily add anything new to anybody's expectation or to-do list. The to-do list is still the same, is to get our students proficient and grade level proficient. So what does that look like? And the message I continuously send to our principals and our faculty is to really highlight what Jen has said, is grade level standards. And in particular, what we're going to try to focus on are promise standards. That's what we call them here. One of our greatest challenges will be to try to give teachers the permission to let go of some of those supporting or secondary standards, because frankly, what we're going to have to do is find some time, and which tends to be the challenge across the board no matter what we do. To Jen's point is focus on grade level. If my youngest daughter is going to be in 8th grade, my expectation is that she should learn 8th grade standards next year. Not, well, wait a minute, you stopped in March, so we're going to go to 7th grade standards is what you were learning in March, and we're going to start there. My expectation and what we've discussed is it's got to be grade level standards. It's got to be. That is a non-negotiable. And then, like Jen said, is backwards plan that and figure out, okay, on this standard, where are our students at? And how do I close the gap on that standard at that time? Not try to close the gap on every standard in August. It just can't happen. Some of the key things we're going to talk about is that data collection. How do we know where our students are at? What does universal screening look like? What is the role of a pre-assessment, and what does a really good pre-assessment look like? And to go back to my original statement, let's not reinvent the wheel. We have these things called PLCs. Well, let's use them. Those 4 questions: what do we want students to know, be able to know and do? How do we know they got it? What do we do for those students who don't get it? And what do we do for those who do? Those are things we do every day. We're trying to close gaps every day regardless. MTSS, their structure's already in place. Let's use them. And there's, of course, some other things. Are we going to implement a jump start, a summer school, flex days? What are we going to do with those? I want to ensure that our teachers feel supported in their professional development. That's something we're talking about, is what does that data analysis really look like to identify gaps at that microscopic level and mesoscale level. I'll tell you, one of our biggest things too, I would say, having been a required district over the last 2+ months, is how do we help and support parents? Because we have to be agile and flexible to move back and forth between these hybrid, on-site, continuous learning models. And how do we help teachers? I'll tell you, that's been one of our greatest challenges, is how do we help support parents? We live in Clinton is a town of high poverty, and how do we help those folks? That's a challenge. So those are the biggest things that we're looking at right now. Not saying we're right, it's just kind of where we're focused. So Cassie, back to you.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, about being able to focus on the priorities. You mentioned, making sure that it's not necessarily what do they know now, but what is it that they need to know, and the grade level standards and the proficiencies that is after that. And you touched a little bit, Wes, into a good segue into the next question, which is the elephant in the room, is like, well, what if we aren't in the classroom 100% of the time? What if we do need to, what I coined the phrase, or I've heard say, brick to click, and then click to brick or back? And how do we pivot between the continuous learning that is required, like what you're doing in Clinton West, and hybrid learning or on-site delivery, and what that means for how we prepare for that in any scenario that might come up, because that is definitely an area of uncertainty. I'm sure that many of the districts in the state of Iowa are really trying to wrap their minds and arms around what that might look like. So can you give us a little bit more insights into, you said you've experienced the last couple of months with some required men's, and you've experienced some challenges. You mentioned parents. I don't know. How do we prepare? How do we prepare for that level of uncertainty in a time like this?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question. And I'll tell you, this is the question that tends to hang over my head every day. And I'll tell you, I would say that hybrid learning is our huckleberry. How do we make this happen? Frankly, what we're focusing on is good teaching is good teaching. Good instruction is good instruction. There is a latency in that continuous learning. So how do we reduce that latency, where normally here I'm sitting in a classroom and a student does some work. I have that opportunity to look right then and there, give them that immediate feedback, and we can have that, that communication loop happen immediately, where that latency is not necessarily as quick with continuous learning. So how do we reduce that latency? What about that hybrid learning? Holy cow, what if you have a student in elementary school? I'm a parent and I've got one in middle school and one in high school, and we go to an A-B schedule or an A-B-C schedule, or A week, a B week, and we have a tremendous amount of conversation about what does right look like with hybrid. That will be our greatest challenge. And that on-site delivery. So what we've come down to saying is, hey, our pacing calendars are our pacing calendars. Our curriculum is our curriculum. And if we can integrate, the opportunities that we have and have had with continuous learning, there's been some amazingly innovative things that have happened through this continuous learning model. Not saying it's been easy. It's been extraordinarily challenging. But there's been some extraordinarily innovative, creative ways to reduce latency, to increase creativity, to increase DOK 3 and 4 opportunities for students. And how do we take that and still do those things on site? How do we do those things in a hybrid model? How do we do those things so that we can seamlessly, and what I keep using with my peers here in my district is, we have to be agile and flexible. Well, to keep things agile is to keep things as similar as you possibly can between these modes or models. Is that easy? Are we going to mess it up? Probably every day. But we're going to learn from it, and that's giving them the permission, as Jen kind of said earlier, to mess it up. Just like we would in any other classroom. It's okay to try and screw it up. I always tell teachers, you're not going to kill a kid by trying something new and innovative. They're not going to fall on the floor and convulse. we're going to figure it out. And you know what, we're going to become better as a result of that. And giving them that permission, I think is huge. So, you know, Jen, I'll throw it back to you and get kind of your take on it.
Yeah. Wes, I really liked that part that you just said about how similar it is between the three will make it easier for kids. And I couldn't agree more because I think that's one of the things I got to experience as a parent with my child, but then also hearing from schools that when we quickly went to, you know, school closures and students working from home, we got to see those things that really became different and where students struggled. So if I were to talk about similarities, I think what you would want to make sure is similar, regardless of the model that you're in, would be relationships, routines, and student agency, where you can give students control of their learning. I think that will help you in any environment. And what I mean by that is it's going to be challenging, but building relationships is one of the most important things that we know teachers do, right? That they're so good at connecting with kids, and whether that's, and I almost like break into tears when I think about the relationships that some of the teachers have had with my kids, a librarian had with my son to make him a reader between 3rd and 4th grade. I mean, I seriously changed his life, believing he was a reader. So that's that relationship piece. And if it's online, it absolutely looks different, but it doesn't mean it's any less important. And I think sometimes we feel like, oh, we have to rush through and get to the content. And that might be one thing, whether you're a leader, a teacher leader, or a teacher yourself on this call, is to give yourself that permission to spend time developing relationships. And that doesn't necessarily look like a 1-hour Zoom every day where we talk about what you do today. There are meaningful ways that you build relationships just like you do in your classroom. It could be through writing assignments. It could be through small groups. It could be one-on-one. So I would encourage you to consider how you still do that regardless of what model you're in, because it serves you well in all three models. When we talk about routines, same thing. If you can build a routine that, hey, we go to this document and this lays out our day, well, that document can happen online, or it can be the thing you write up on the board. That's just the same. And if we're talking about student agency, if we're already, you know, if we always think of ourselves as we have to carry the kids across the bridge and that's what success is, they're gonna be lost when we're not there holding their hand. So how do we help teachers see that actually your goal is to get kids to walk across the bridge on their own? And that's success, because that student agency, which I know this kind of jumping into our next question, but that student agency totally gives kids control of their learning, whether it's face-to-face, hybrid, or online.
Yeah, I really like what both of you said about the teaching is teaching, keeping it similar, but then focusing our energy towards the student and allowing the student to create his or her own learning journey and path of what works best for them. And so Jen, tell us a little bit more. You kind of started to go in a little bit about the student agency bit, but I'd love to hear more about your thoughts around how do we keep these students engaged? How do we keep them just motivated to do the learning regardless of where learning occurs, whether it's inside the classroom or it's at home or you name it. So tell us your thoughts about that, if you could.
Yeah. Well, when I start working with schools about engagement, the first thing I share with them is some data from Gallup that talks about regardless of attendance rates, student engagement decreases the longer they're in school. Our high school students are less engaged in learning than our elementary students. And that research is pretty spot on for the last 10 years. Gallup has it all. And it's like 44.
Anybody that has a teenager can probably also
add
a little check mark on that.
Right,
sure.
Right. And then we move to distance learning all of a sudden, and we're like, why are kids not engaged? Well, they just maybe were in attendance before. They may not have been engaged in learning before. So what can you do to improve that? And there are a couple really standout pieces in research about making a difference. So if students have more choice, that increases their motivation for learning. There's all sorts of research around that. And what I would encourage you to think about, if you're thinking like, how do I give kids choice? It can be in the content. It could be like, okay, I have this skill that I need everyone to do, reading comprehension. But they can choose the content. They can go out and practice that in any content they want. That would be one way. You could give a playlist of options and say, okay, I want everyone to watch this video, but you can choose from these other 4 or 5 things that help you get at, this big idea. So choice is one. The process that you use. You could say, well, this is the content. We all have to learn about the Declaration of Independence, and we're all going to produce the same thing, but how you get there could be on your own. You could interview someone, you could read something, you could watch something. The choice could be that way. And then finally, the product. Give kids choice in how they show what they know. If you're assessing writing, well, you want that to be in writing, of course. But how many times do we force writing to be the medium when really the learning's about another concept entirely? Could they create a video? And does that matter if I'm face-to-face or if I'm hybrid or if I'm virtual? It doesn't. If you give kids that choice, can I leave you a voicemail message? Can I create a Flipgrid? Can I, write an essay? Can I, take a picture of what I've written and send it to you? I mean, there'd be all sorts of ways that you could give kids choice, and whether it's the content, the process, the product, give them voice in what it is we're going to learn about. Have them with some ownership about their learning and how well did I do? What's my next step? Anything we can do to have it be kid-driven instead of teacher-driven really is going to help with engagement. And again, it's getting the kid to walk across the bridge instead of us. And I know I do this as a parent sometimes, and it's so hard, like carrying them across, because I do it out of the best intent. We all do. Like, look at what I did for those kids. And it's really hard to say my success is they didn't need me. Oh, they absolutely did. They absolutely did need you to cross that bridge. It was all the stuff you did beforehand.
That motivation. What do you have to say, Wes, around engagement? Do you have some additional thoughts to add on to what Jen just said?
Wow, Jen, amazing. Yeah, I mean, hallelujah, amen, all that stuff. And I'm going to go back to a previous statement. Why reinvent the wheel? We know what it takes. The research is very clear. As a teacher, student choice was huge in my classroom. We can still do that in a hybrid model. We can still do that online or continuous learning. We can still do those things. I continuously go back to my teachers and say, student-centered, student-centered, and we can do that in a continuous learning model. We can do that in a hybrid model. We can do that. It goes back to a bunch of things that we've already said. Let's not, that brings the anxiety down. Wow, we're already doing these things. Let's not try to say, oh my gosh, the context is different. Do I have to do it differently? No, I will add a couple of things just from my experiences this last 2 months. Especially, teachers do this really well in their classroom for the most part, and its structure. The online, it's like, what do I do? How do I structure things online or through that continuous learning? I will tell you that the teachers who had as much structure and scaffolding as possible throughout the days of continuous learning, well, that's what we would do on site. We saw far more engagement. Because we were a required district does not mean that we had 100% engagement. I'll promise you that. And it was far lower at the high school than it was at the elementary. I would tell you that our elementaries probably hovered around 85 to 88% in engagement, if you will. Middle school tended to be about 78 to 80, and the high school tended to be about 76 to 78% engagement. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean they got it? We don't know. I mean, that's where we're going to have to find out. But I will tell you that the teachers that tended to have the most engagement did several things. One, they structured their classrooms are structured. Their online environment was structured. They gave them choice. I will tell you, the more they allowed students to be creative and innovative, the more engagement we saw. To Jen's point of saying, you could do this by writing a passage or a journal entry. Maybe it's a video, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's whatever. You put, whatever it was in there. The more choice that students had, especially creative choice, the more engagement we saw, which is beautiful because that's student-centered. That increases DOK right there. So those are the big things that I would say what our experiences over the last 2 months have helped.
I like what you say about student choice. I know when I get choices that I'm much more, motivated to respond in a positive manner as well, in a way that creates me a success, whether it be in the kitchen or whether it be in various different aspects of life. And so
I would say,
go ahead.
Yeah, I would say even one more is that it's choice based on relevancy to the student, allowing them to not necessarily take that story, but to make it their own or make it something that was important to them or, interesting to them. So I continuously, and that's just good, what we find a good instruction as the research tells us. So sorry, Cassie.
Yeah, and let me ask just a follow-on question to that. Does that differ? Because you talked about how engagement at the upper grades, whether it be high school or even dipping down into the middle school, does that student choice matter more so the older the student is?
I think, and Jen, jump in here too. We've spent a lot of time talking about engagement in our district and the Holy Grail is, how do you get engagement not through compliance, but through proficiency, relevancy, and those kinds of things. And that's a Holy Grail, whether you're doing continuous learning hybrid or on site. So, unfortunately, our school systems for centuries have pounded compliance into kids. And because of that, that's what we often lean towards. It's our safety zone of compliance. It's easier for us to manage compliance as opposed to choice. So that's the Holy Grail. I don't know if I've answered your question, and Jen, you can jump in here. How do we do that? To me, I'm going to go back and say giving teachers permission. In fact, give them not only permission, but challenge them to get out of their own comfort zone and put the student in the center of the thought, as opposed to, because I always say, I was terrible at this. I would always, hey, give them some wait time, but I don't hear anybody responding, so I'll just go ahead and answer that question for them. What I tell them, and this sounds very harsh, but I have just robbed that student the opportunity to learn something. And whether you're online or what have you, it's just good. I robbed a lot of kids of their opportunity to learn something because I just went ahead and answered it for them. I didn't allow them that opportunity to struggle, to feel that rigorous, work and what that feels like. So Jen, I'll shut up. Your turn.
Wes, I agree with everything that you've said. I would, and I think what you're hearing from both of us is that it's equally important for a kindergartner as it is a 12th grader and beyond. I think it's probably easier to get a kindergartner to think about choice. It's probably harder to get them focused. It's probably a little easier to focus, but harder to get them really thinking creatively as they're older. Not that they don't have it within them, but because of that compliance piece that Wes has talked about, they're going to wait you out in the secondary. They're going to wait you out and be like, you don't really mean it. If I just stay quiet long enough, you're going to eventually do this for me because you don't like this. I know it. Where, they're younger, they're like, oh my gosh, I could do all of this. And the longer they're in school, the less you see that. But you hit the button and then, and when I think about the difference between my 4th and 7th grader, you hit the right topic with my 4th grader and it's hard to keep him quiet. And with my 7th grader, he will totally just wait. And he'll just wait and see how much, he can get by with. And if he's quiet longer, it'll happen. So yeah, I think it's equally important. I think that's what you're hearing from Wes and I. It's important for all kids. It just may look a little different from the teacher's perspective as a, kindergartner, fourth grader, seventh grader, high schooler.
So we have one final question that really relates to this conversation. It's a good segue into that, which is basically, okay, take everything that we've just talked about, take everything that we know, take everything that we just experienced in the last 2 to 3 months, relative to, keeping the same thing the same. Good teaching is good teaching, families, communities, blending together these new normals that we have formed. How do we take that positiveness and that energy that we have built up over the last couple of months and translate into creating even a better new normal than what we thought we could go into the fall? So I think Jen, or was it Wes? I think we're going to start with you, Wes. Wes, could you perhaps give us a little bit of thought around that?
Yeah, so I think with every challenge comes opportunity, and we've kind of suggested through this, I think the thread has been, there's been some extraordinarily innovative and creative ways to do continuous learning that could actually be done on site or hybrid, whatever that looks like, and taking those lessons learned and those extraordinary, examples of being creative and innovative online and still saying, hey, we're going to do some of these things even if we're on site. And I'm going to go back to a question or two ago and say, keeping it as common across the modes, as keeping the pace as hard as that might be, keeping the expectations, keeping the choice, keeping the routine, keeping the structure as similar. That's an opportunity that I think will be helpful to reduce anxiety for teachers, but also give students some normalness, if you will. So that's how we're going to try our best to attack this one. It's a new normal for sure, and we have to embrace that opportunity and try to make it as creating lower anxiety for everybody, the teachers and the students and the parents and the community and everybody. So that's my 30-second overview. Jen, what are you thinking?
Well, like you, I was thinking, gosh, it goes back to that kind of parent connection and kind of that first question when we talked about, what are all the ways we can get feedback, and think about that throughout the year. I think that's one thing for us to try to encourage one another to be less fearful of. Sometimes reaching out, to parents or families about, oh, how did you think this went, is scary for schools. And we're just all in this together. And I hear that phrase in so many different ways in COVID, and I think about it for education too. So that stakeholder group, really engaging kids and families and community members ongoing, would be one of the pieces that I think would help us in a new normal. The other thing I would consider is just even personally, it's making me think about what I value for face-to-face. There's a lot of things that I thought was important in a face-to-face environment that I'm able to do just as well, if not better, remotely, working in my office at home. But there are other things that are very clear to me that I'm missing. And when I get back face-to-face, like those have more value to me. I want to think about how I spend my time face-to-face in a way that highlights and takes advantage of all the great tools that we have. And it's things like, relationships, and it's things like social emotional learning. And it's less about all the content that I was worried about, even in my own job, like all the stuff. That's a little less important. And you can still do it. I feel closer to some of the people on my team through our weekly meetings and our one-on-one Zooms, because we're talking about things that I, wouldn't have done before in face-to-face because I was so busy. But now that you have this chance and you're like, wow, I really learned a lot about you. Well, that's so important for teachers and kids. And our teachers are so good at that, building those relationships. But I think sometimes in our busyness, we get this impression we've got to march through the learning, the essential standards. Like we got to march through those. And it's really just thinking about what's critical for us to learn. You know, if we've got this precious amount of time that we're face-to-face or we're in a hybrid, or even if we are starting virtually, focus on those things that you're really finding critical. And I think that's what this gives us a chance to do.
Mm-hmm.
Pandemics help you think about, what's really important, I guess.
That's right.
I've never been through one before, so that's what I'm going to have to focus on.
Now we can all say we have. I definitely resonate with both what you said as well as what Wes said in that the silver lining in all of this, just even in my own experience and being able to carve out that precious family time that we perhaps didn't have before was so vital. And being more engaged as a parent involved in my child's education was so vital as well during this time. And so I do want to take that silver lining and that positive aspects of what this have brought to focus on what matters most. And I really like the way that you say about relationships and trying to keep everything as simple and as normal as possible. And so I really appreciate that. Do you have any final words of wisdom for those that are still tuned into us today?
Wes, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Hey, Jen, you said we hear it all the time. We're in this together. Is opportunity. Let's not reinvent the wheel, and don't be afraid to make a mistake. We're going to figure this out, and we're going to figure it out together. So, I mean, those are the highlights for me. And, I'm passionate about this. I could talk forever, and more so because I think I learn as much just talking through it as I do and thinking about it as I do by myself pondering it, hearing what Jen has to say or Cassie, your insights. And, anybody else who's out there listening, I'm always open for, I don't have all the answers, and I'm learning too. So look forward to hearing what other folks are doing someday down the road and stealing from them. I'm going. So Jen.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, I would follow up with a final statement where, if we go back to a brick and mortar situation in August or whenever we do, and we look the same as we did 2 years ago, a year ago, 100 years ago, that's on us. That doesn't feel good. That doesn't sound right to me. We should be able to highlight what we've learned and do something better and take those risks. I appreciate Wes and his leadership in his school being able to say to his staff, like, it's okay if we try something that doesn't work. That to me is the value of teaching. The value that a teacher provides my child has nothing to do with the content. He can Google that and it's not that. It's the meaning making. It's the relationships. It's let me help you walk across the bridge. He can watch a YouTube video about it, but gosh, teachers are so critical in processing that. And if we look the same, shame on us. Like, this is a great opportunity to take what we already know, use what we've got, make it better. And I just think it's a great chance to do something better for kids.
And I love this quote that Heather has up on the slide here, where nothing is possible. Everything is possible. When nothing is sure, everything is possible. So definitely resonates with what we are experiencing and what we are about to experience, certainly come in the fall. Yeah. And so I don't know if we have, looking at the time here, Heather, do we have enough questions? Are there any questions in the chat that we want to resonate?
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage people that are logged on, if you do have some questions for Jen and Wes, we do have a couple minutes, a few minutes left that we can dig into some additional questions if you want to enter them into chat, or if you feel like you just want to come off a mute and ask your question. We've got a little bit of time. Is there anyone out there with a question?
It's that wait time.
Yeah, see, we're going to wait them out. I know I've seen, I saw one question earlier about, one of the things that I think keeps us up at night is, are the families that we know that have some compounding challenges at home, right? Things that we feel like, it's tough for us to fix. Can either of you speak to a little bit about maybe the community partnerships that are happening, or the ways that you're working, to make sure that you're addressing equity in your district, but helping to solve some of those problems that this school closure may have highlighted?
Ooh, equity.
Mm-hmm.
Another huckleberry. Thanks for bringing that one up. That is a challenge, and no matter what we do, all we can do is the best that we can with the resources that we have. In Clinton, we certainly try to engage, we're in this continuous learning environment. So how do we get students who don't have internet an equitable experience? How do we get students who have the internet but not a device? How do we help them? I'll tell you, we've gone through the gamut and we've tried, you name it, we've considered it or tried it. I'm going to go back to, it comes down to relationships, not only with the student, but the parents, and knowing who they are and knowing their challenges, and having, I would say, if not weekly, daily conversations between the district. Maybe it's the teacher, maybe it's the principal, maybe it's the nurse, maybe it's your SRO. And we've done all of those things with those folks, and trying to provide them every tool, resource, and asset necessary for them to be successful. That's my quick answer, Jen.
Well, knowing that we're talking about those acceleration strategies of scaffolding supports for grade level standards, that's one huge equitable instructional strategy you can make. That's not just good for some kids. That's been shown to be most beneficial for kids that have a learning gap for whatever reason, whether it's socioeconomic and background, or if it's a learning, unfinished learning. Like, that's a huge strategy for equity. The other thing I would say, here's a quick resource. Sometimes I like actionable hard items. Look at PBS. If your kids don't have access to technology, they probably have access to a television. PBS has a lot of resources, and we're even trying to work with a partnership across the state, but all the way up to high school, they've got some resources that then, through things like phone calls or leave me a voicemail, or other kinds of distance learning opportunities, you can connect with kids around their learning. So there's just a quick maybe check out and to do if that's helpful.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much. I know we've had a lot of folks chatting in saying this was a really helpful and really helpful conversation, and just thanking you. And I want to make sure that all of you are really understand how much we value your experience and your guidance, and just the willingness to think out loud and not necessarily have all the answers. But really want to thank Cassie and Jen and Wes for joining us today and facilitating this conversation and working through these things with us. If you are interested in future webinars, you can visit Edmentum's website, just edmentum.com. But a number of webinars coming up in the month of June as schools are completing that return to learn plan. Some are recorded as well. But that's about it. So I know that we're just about out of time here, and we will definitely keep this recording and send that out to everyone who was either registered or joined the webinar today. But I think that wraps it up for us. So thank you so much, Cassie, Jen, and Wes, and everybody. I hope you're safe and healthy, and we look forward to connecting with you sometime soon.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. Take care.